Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Alma, and I'm here today to talk to you about all the wonderful books that I read this past year, 2023. So grab a cup of coffee or something to drink because I have quite a few books to go over and a little mix of genres too that I really enjoyed. So let's do it. So before I get started, I just wanted to talk about the reason I'm doing this channel. This past year was my first year of getting back into reading books. As a child growing up and a younger person, I love to read. But as an adult, after getting married and having children, going back to work and just working full time, it was just hard to sit down and read a book. And I'd be lucky if I read one book for the whole year. So a couple years ago, I started to homeschool my daughter here at the house. And of course, we do a lot of reading with our homeschool. So that kind of, brought that love of reading back into my heart and in my life. So this at the end of last year, I started watching a lot of booktube channels and I really got interested in all the books that people were talking about. And I thought, well, what kind of books would I be interested in now? There's so many different genres out there. So I kind of challenged myself on Goodreads to put a total about 40 books. I thought that was a good number that to reach for, and I actually was pretty high for me. I didn't think I'd read that many by a long shot. Well, this year actually, I'm finishing up one book this month. I got a couple days before I can count that one as part of my total. But I'm going to have read 106 books this year, which is amazing. And I'm count that as a big success for me because, like I said, I didn't think I could even read 20, let alone 40. So, um, a big help too is following a lot of everyone on the booktube and just getting recommendations and things to read, and then also a lot of the readathons that were so fun. And I kind of went overboard. I do a couple readathons every month, to challenge myself. So that was so much fun. But anyways, so now at the end of the year, I kind of went over back and I went through and to see what kind of books stood out to me still at the end of the year, which ones were my favorites. So I have broken it down into four genres were my main genres that I read. I read a lot of Christian fiction, some historical fiction, which I learned is a big favorite of mine. Had read a lot of great books there, and then some sci-fi fantasy, which I thought would be my favorite because I love sci-fi movies, sci-fi TV shows. That's my favorite type. So I thought I would, but I didn't really read a whole lot of sci-fi fantasy. I'm looking forward to delving into that. Actually, this coming month I have quite a few sci-fi fantasies on my list, and I did have a post a video of my January TBR, and I'll link that below too. So if you're interested in seeing what I plan on reading this coming month. Also, I have, of course, with homeschooling my daughter, I read quite a few of middle grade books this year. So I picked out two that kind of stood out to me that I really enjoyed, even as an adult. Really enjoyed them. So I'm going to start with my Christian fiction category. I don't have a lot of the books here because, of course, when I started this last year, I didn't really own very many books. So my shelf, I didn't have a lot of books. So a lot of the books that I read this year were actually library books that I checked out, which is awesome. Used my library very, very well this year. I was in and out all the time. So, but I will put a picture up here so that you can see those that I'm talking about. So Christian fiction. So the first one I have I'm going to talk about is actually a series I read. It was my first completed series that I read, and the first book is called If I Run, and this is by Terry Blackstock. And this one was recommended to me by another booktuber, or actually a homeschool mama, talked about it and how they read it and they loved it, and then they zipped right through the first because there was three in the series that they zip right through them. And I couldn't believe that because I'm not a fast reader, so it takes me a while to get through a book. But this one, I really did zip through this one. I read all three books and I loved them. So the first one was my favorite, though. It was, like I said, If I Run. And this one is about a woman that is on the run because she is suspected of murdering someone who happened to be her friend. And so the three books are about her on the run, trying to get find out who actually did kill this person, and then her encounter with the person that was charged to investigate or track her down. And it was really good. It was high speed. I mean, it was really fast paced read, easy read. I just loved it. So if you're looking for something suspenseful and a fast read, definitely pick up that series. And like I said, there's three books, and the first one is If I Run. So the next one that is probably my favorite. I go back and forth, but I think this book was my favorite book of the year. And it's kind of together with the second book. But the first book is called When the Day Comes by Gabriel Meyer. And it was just perfect because it was two genres that I love, um, time travel, and, well, actually, three genres: time travel, historical fiction, and Christian fiction, all into one. And she did it beautifully. So the first in the prep, and I know a lot of people have been talking about this book, but I just, everybody needs to read this book. It's so beautifully written. So in a and a something that I had never even heard of before, as far as, it's a great, wonderful concept about, it revolves around a young woman that is living two lives at the same time and in two different time frames. So basically, she's in one time frame, and then when she goes to bed that night and she wakes up the next day, she does the same day, but in a different year, in a totally different in this totally different place with different parents. Um, but she's the same person. Like, she remembers both living both lives, and she lives them simultaneously. So she lives the same day twice, but in different. It's hard. It's just, and so the book talks about her lives, her two lives that she's living, and the title is When the Day Comes. Is in her world, her, and not everybody's like that. She's unique, and of course, nobody else except for her mother, I think. Excuse me. But her she knows that when she turns 21, she's going to have to decide which of these two lives she's going to live and just stay there, and she won't be going back and forth. So it's kind of that, like, is she going to stay in this life, or is she going to stay in the other? It's such a beautiful, beautiful story. So, but I there's a second part. There's a second book. And this one I do own. I don't know the other one. I will own it because I am picking up the first one this year, because she's coming out with the third book. So this is another one that made my best list. And this is the second book in that series in this moment. And I don't want to talk about too much of it because I don't want to spoil the first one, but beautiful, great, great books. Okay. The next one is a favorite, not only of me, but of my husband, because I do a lot of reading, and when I read out loud, I like to read out loud to him, so he listens to the books as I'm reading them, enjoying them. Not all of them. I just pick out a few that I think he might like. And this is one that we read together, and this one is called Dear Edith, Love, or yeah, Dear Henry. I always get it confused. Dear Henry, Love Edith. And it's by Becca Kinzer. And it's such a funny book. I had heard that it was a funny book, and it is. It had us rolling as we were reading it together. And I think that's what made it enjoyable, because I got to share that with my husband, and we were just laughing throughout it the whole time. And the concept is two people that are writing to each other that don't know. They think of, like, the woman thinks that the man is old, and the man thinks that she is old. It's just a funny book. And they don't they think they know each other, but they don't know each other, and how they get together. But the big thing in this book is the town that they are in. Is The people are just hilarious. um, they're like character number 3 in this book. The whole town is just so funny. So pick that book up if you want some a funny read that'll keep you rolling. Okay, I need to pick this up because I have a lot of books and I'm going too slow, I think. Another one that I liked in Christian fiction is sorry, I got my notes down here. I'm looking down there. Is The Maid of, I got to say this right, I always mess it up. The Maid of Ballymaccool. I think that's how, and that's by Jennifer Dybel. I'll put that up there. So this one is like a Cinderella retelling story. And I tried to read some retellings. I think I have another one here that is going to be that is also a retelling that I'll come to next. But this one was a Cinderella one, and it was really funny. I'm not funny. It was really cute. A historical fiction set in Scotland, I believe, or England. Oh, I don't have the books. Can't remember. But it's she's a maid, and of course, and it is the Cinderella story, and it's just a really fun book, and I really romance, really nice, really good romance in that one too. Okay, so I I talked about the If I Run series was one I finished. This is another one that I finished a series, and these books are called this. These are by Colin Cassette, and I read all 3 this year. The first one is probably my favorite. It's called Counted with the Stars, and this is an interesting. It's a biblical fiction, but it's based the based on a woman, an Egyptian woman that lived through the time of Moses, when Moses came to get the people, the Hebrew people out, and the plagues, all the plagues that happened. So she is you see the plagues happening in Egypt from an Egyptian's point of view, which is really an interesting take on it. And you see her how she deals with it. And you see how that it's really a tragedy in that country, all the terrible things that happen, and her story, and then her journey through not only leaving Egypt, but forming a friendship with those Hebrew people. And and then the 3 books. So the first one is that one, and then the second book continues the story when they're in the desert, Shadow of the Storm, which is also a really good one. And then this one is the third book, Wings on the Wind. And don't you just love these covers? And so this story, and they're all different characters going forward in the story, but all around that same premise and story. And this is the story when they come out of the the desert. So great series. So I was really glad that I got through another series. So that's good. Okay, another Christian fiction, and this is the other fairy tale retelling. And this one is called Fairest of Heart by Karen Whitmire. And this one was really cute. The covers just tells it all. It's Snow White. Yeah, Snow White. Snow White and the dwarves, right? So, but in this book, it's a like a Western take on it. So instead of dwarves, she has like old ranchers, and then the prince is a sheriff in town, and it's such a cute story. It's first book I've written by this author, and I want to continue because this is a series. This is the first book. She's got another one coming out. I think it comes out in either February or March. I'm not quite sure, but it is a Cinderella Western, and I think it's called When the Boot Fit. If the Boot Fits, yeah, I think if the boot fits. So I'm definitely going to pick that one up when it comes out and continue this series. Okay, I think this is my last. I'm looking over at my cart. I think this is my last Christian fiction. Yes. So this is a Pearl in the Sand. It's another biblical fiction. I read this during Paperbacks and Ponytails readathon that she had in October, and this was our group read, and I'm really glad that she picked it because it was a really wonderful book, and it's the story of you see the of Rahab. Is it Rahab? Yeah, I think it's Rahab. I drew a blank. And I don't have my glasses on. Rahab, with the Jericho, her when the Israelites come and they attack the city of Jericho, and her family gets saved. I believe it's Rahab. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But anyway, it's a really good book. It's a biblical fiction about her story, and it gives a lot of course, it's not biblical like in the Bible, but what if, this could have been her life and her situation. So it's really good. It's really a good read. And it's a short read, so it was a good buddy read that we all had together in October. Okay, so that are my Christian fiction. I hope I got all of them. I believe I did. I'm going to move on to, I'm going to talk about middle grade real quick so I can, because while I have it kind of fresh in my mind. Middle grade, I only have two. The first one is is called The War That Saved My Life. I'm sorry, I've got my notes. The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Bradley. And this is kind of like a historical fiction middle grade. And it's about a young girl named Ada, who, Ada or Ada, I don't know how you, probably Ada. She was born with a club foot, and her life is really sad because the mother is abusive and doesn't get her treated. And this is takes place during World War II, and they're living in England, and it's during the time when the bombings were happening. So a lot of the children got sent out to the outlying areas in England, and that was her story, going to another place away from her mother who treated her so abusively, and her trauma of getting through and feeling love from someone that actually showed her love. It's a beautiful story. It's really, kind of heart wrenching. There's a second part. There's a second book. I read that as well. But this one was my favorite of the two. And then we have my favorite middle grade book that I read this year, and it's a sci-fi one, and it's called A Rover Story by Jasmine Warga. And I love this book. I cried in this book. It was really good. It's about the story, and it's about the story of a little rover. Like the rovers that they send to Mars, and it's his story. He's telling the story. He has self-awareness, and him being built, him being trained, and then being sent up to Mars. And the story is just really so good. And then his name is Resilience, and he goes by Rez. And then he has a little buddy that is his drone. And there's there's a rover up there now that does have a drone that they use, and that's where the author took that story from. And his little drone that flies is called Fly, and my favorite character probably of the book. And it's just a good read. I mean, it's middle grade, but it's a good book. Definitely recommend that one. Okay, let's go with historical fiction. I think this turned out to be one of my favorite genres that I've read this year. It's I read a lot of good books with historical fiction. I'll talk about the ones I don't have first. All library books again that I checked out. The first one is Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. I cried a lot. This book is very emotional. It's about a young family that gets pretty much ripped apart and separated. The parents of the children get sent to an orphanage and are treated poorly. And it's a dual timeline book where you see the past of what happened and then what happens in the future. And the orphanage where these children were sent to, or basically stolen and taken, was an orphanage that was run by a woman that was taking children and pretty much selling them off to the highest bidder. And after I read the book, and it was such a sad story, and at the end in the author's notes, this woman that was in this book was real. She was a real person, and she really did these things, horrible things. And I don't know if you're like me, but especially with historical fiction, when I see historical events, I go on a rabbit trail and I start researching it myself. And I did that, and I found some YouTube videos about families that had gone through this orphanage and were separated from their real families because they were stolen, or things like that. It's just amazing. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Again, it's Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. So that was one of my favorites this year. I had a favorite. I had a couple favorite authors that I tried this year. Suzanne Meisner was my favorite. I don't know. Maybe she was tied with. I love all these authors. So Susan Meisner, I read at the book that I'm reading right now that I haven't finished is hers. So at the end of this year, I'll have read 4 of her books this year. Um, I've read As Bright as Heaven was one, and this one was about. It was based around the Spanish flu, so that I went down a rabbit hole on that one, and that one was about a family going through that at the time, and the the hardships that they went through and how they got through that. The second book was Only the Beautiful, and this one was another great one. It had to do, and I love how she puts things in her books that would makes you want to go and look them up, look a researcher, research them. Only the Beautiful was regarding um, eugenics and how that happened in even in our country. And then the third book, which is my favorite of all her books I read, and it's called The Nature of Fragile Things. And this book was so good, and it had to do with the big earthquake in San Francisco. But there was a side story that had a twist, that had a mystery. It was really good. I really loved that book. And then, so those are my 3 Susan Meisner books. And then my other favorite author historical fiction, that I read 3 books of hers. The first one I read of hers was What the Wind Knows, and I read this one because I had to do a prompt challenge that had like weather, so I picked wind, and I'm glad I picked it because it was a really good book. It's another historical fiction that has a little time travel twist in there, and I love me some sci-fi in my in my books, so that was why I picked this one, and it was really good. So that one, and it was based in Ireland. Beautiful story, and this one is by Amy Harmon again. And then the second book I read of hers, this one was another 5-star, Where the Lost Wander, and this one had to do with um, when people were traveling out west on wagon trains and things. And this story is really, really good regarding a young woman that is going through that with her family and what happens to her family. You know, there's tragedy, but also a love story in here as well. So this one is another great read by Amy Harmon. But my favorite book by Amy Harmon this year was the last one I read at the end of the year, and it was called A Girl Called Samson. And this one is about a young woman that is living during the Revolutionary War time period, and she disguises herself as a man, and she becomes a soldier in this war. And I loved the premise, and my daughter and I we're in this kind of time period this year in our homeschool, so that's why I picked it up. But I didn't think I'd love it as much as I did. There's a beautiful love story in it, and then just her background story and the things that she dealt with also. So this is one of my favorite historical fictions of the year for sure. Now I'm going to talk about one that's been talked about a lot. It's not a new book by any means, but I picked this. I picked this one up at my library sale for $1. It's brand new, pretty much, and I had it on my shelves for most of the year. I hadn't got around to reading it, and I kept hearing about how good it was, but I put it off until reading it in November because that was like Historathon month. And then after I read, I'm like, why did I have this on my shelves all this time? Because it's such an amazing story, and I had heard it was good, but it was just a beautiful story about 2 sisters in World War II. They're 2 different paths that they had, living in different places, and the story. It's just heart. It's an amazing, it's worth the hype, definitely. I really enjoyed it. And this one is, I'm sorry, I didn't even say the title. It's called The Nightingale. Just the cover is just so pretty. I love the gold. The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Um, it's funny, at the beginning of the year, I started reading a Christian Hanna book, but I stopped reading it. I didn't connect with it. I might pick it back up, and that was called The Winter Garden. But I really, and that, maybe that's why I was hesitant to pick, actually pick this one up after I bought it. But it was really good. And it was a fast read too, because I wanted to know what happened. I was like, I need to know what happens to these two girls. It's also kind of a dual timeline, to just go back and forth between the present and World War II. So definitely a wonderful read. Okay, let me put these back on my cart here. Let's see. So we've done historical fiction, we've done Christian fiction, we've done middle grade. I'm going to end this with my sci-fi and fantasy. So the first one I'll talk about is a book. It's a Christian sci-fi or Christian fantasy called Wistress, and I think this was part of a readathon group read too, because there was a reason I read it, but I'm not quite sure. But it's by Nadine Brandis, and it's got a beautiful cover. I don't know. I wish I owned it, but I don't. I'm really like this book. It had to do with a young girl that her tears would give wishes, I believe. It's been a while since I read this book, but I believe that's what it was. And her story and other people that had different powers in that world. And I hope it kind of ended on kind of like a little cliffhanger thing at the end. And I'm hoping that there's another if that there's a sequel. If you know that there is, please let me know. I haven't heard, but I don't really keep touch on what's coming up. But that would be a great book to have another part in it. That was a good one. Then we have Tress of the Emerald Sea. This one is by Brandon Sanderson, and this one the only reason I picked it up because I saw it in the library in the news section, and I knew that he's pretty famous for fantasy books, and it was such a pretty cover. I was like, I'll try this one out, and I'm really glad I did, because it was really not what I normally read, but it was a fantasy book about a young woman, and it was kind of the premise of Princess Bride. What if the Princess Bride, if you've seen that movie, her love gets taken by pirates, and then she never sees him again, or at the beginning, and he's kind of lost to her. So this is the premise of, what if Princess Bride, instead of staying home and on the farm, she actually went and looked for her guy, looked for her love. And so it's Tress. The book is about her looking for her a lost love that has been taken, and her rescuing him. It's a really interesting story. The world is so different. The sea, when it talks about the Emerald Sea, is not water, it's like a spore. It's really interesting. But even with all that, it was a fun, whimsical read, and I really enjoyed it. The next one, let's see, is that I read that I really love was Divine Rivals. And that one does have a second part. It's actually out, and I can't wait to read it this year. It's by Rebecca Ross. And this is a story, it's kind of like that enemies to lovers that they say. And a girl named Iris and a guy named Roman, they work at the same place, and they're competing, but it also has a magical element. It's an interesting book because it's like fantasy, but also feels historical in a way too. And there's a magical element in there, and it's a really good love story too. And I really loved it. So like I said, I'm looking forward to reading this second book in that series. Let's see, I did Wistress, I did Hail Mary. Oh no, I didn't do that one. I'll do that one last because that was one of my favorites. Um, this is another kind of a sci-fi time travel. I love time travel. The ideas, one of my favorites. So this is another time travel book about a woman who inadvertently, by accident, time travels, and And because of that, she gets into a situation where she's has a daughter that she needs to find, and when she does find her, does she stay with her? Does she go back to her own time? It's really good, and it's by Diane Chamberlain. So this one's not new either. Um, I think I just was looking up time travel books, and this popped up in my search, and the premise sounded really interesting. So I read it, and loved it. So this is another great one. Okay, this is a controversial one, especially with my daughter, because she's like, "Why are you reading this?" But I finally read Twilight this year. I've loved the movies. I'm one of these that if it's on TV, I'm gonna watch it, even though I've watched it 1,000 times. But had never read the books, so I was like, found them in my library store, 50 cents. Had to read it, and there was so I read it at the beginning of the year, and I really liked it. A lot of people says it's kind of it is, you know, teen cheesy stuff, but for me it was like the nostalgia of going and actually reading the book that I really like the movie. And now my challenge to myself this year is to finish. I meant to keep going, and I do have the books, all of them. I just haven't gotten around to picking it back up and reading it. So that's a challenge for myself. So that was a good one. My favorite sci-fi, and that one's kind of tied with When the Day Comes as my favorite book of the year, is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I loved this book. I couldn't put it down. It was my kind of sci-fi book, and I keep hearing that maybe they'll make a movie out of it. It's written by Andy Weir, and he wrote The Martian, which is another favorite movie of mine. I love that movie. That's another one. If I see it, I'll watch it again. And so after I read Project Hail Mary, I later on in the year I read The Martian. Even though I had seen the movie, I said, "Well, I'm just going to read it," and I loved that one too. But it was not it was good. It was really a good book. But Project Hail Mary was just perfect for me. It's a story of a man named Ryland. I wrote the name down. um, and it opens up where he wakes up in a spaceship and he doesn't know who he is or where he's at. It's like, who am I? He has amnesia, and he's in space in a spaceship by himself. That's all you need to know. I don't want to say anything else because I don't ruin anything. But if you like sci-fi, fantasy, you got to read this book. And this has been out for a while. So, and I did find it at the library. So when I saw it, I was super jazzed that I saw it. So, okay. Um, let's see. I'm looking down at my board. I think I've talked about all of them. I had so many. Um, let's see if I got everything on my cart. I did. Read a lot of good books this year. I want to do a couple shout outs at the end of my video. I got my coffee cup going. I should have at least turned it the whole time. But anyway, so couple shout outs I want to give to first to Chantel from Chantel Reads All Day. I had been thinking about doing starting a booktube channel because it's like I want to talk about these books that I've read. I was like, who am I going to talk to? To him, I talk to my husband all the time, and he's like, and I want to do recommendations, especially for a lot of the Christian fiction books, because there's not a lot of them on BookTube. But I was watching a video of hers where she gave, I think, 10 ideas or things if you do want to start your channel, and I'll link that video below too. So if anybody's interested, great video. But Chantel says the first thing is just do it, just start it. Don't worry about if you have the right equipment. Don't worry about this or that. And you know what? After I saw that video, I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to do it, and I don't have all the equipment. I'm just using my phone, and editing is frustrating right now because I'm learning how to do it, but it's so fun. And then so I took her advice. Thank you, Chantel, for giving me that advice to just do it. Worry about the rest later, or not worry, because I don't want this to be stressful. I want this to be a fun thing that I'm doing. And then another shout out to Taylor, and her channel is I want to make sure I get it right, and I'll link her channel below as well. Tales and Treats with Tay. She also gave me some good advice on her channel when she was taking Q&A on her channel, and she was very thoughtful and helpful. And I just want to say thank you to her for encouraging me. Needed that encouragement at the end because I was hee-hawing back. My husband had gotten me some equipment for Christmas, and she answered that question and reached out to me and said, encouraged me. So that kind of pushed me over the edge. So thank you, Taylor. So those are the books that my top books for 2023. Like I said, I read 106 books. So many. It was hard to kind of say which one. I had a lot of 5-star reads. I was very generous with my 5-star reads. But the books I talk about today are the ones that kind of still stand out to me even now. And I have what was I lost my train of thought. But I'm just so thankful that I was able to get them all read. There's still, I'll be making another video about the books that I want to read next year that I wanted to read this year. I just, you can't read them all. You want to read them all, but you can't read them all. So that'll be out soon to do that video where I have a ton of books that I'm going to be, try to prioritize and get out. But then, like I said, there's so many books coming out. Gabriel Meyer's new book is coming out. Becca Kinzer, the one that wrote the Dear Henry, Love Edith, she's got a new book coming out that sounds really good. And then, of course, the second book to Divine Rival. So I have a lot of books that are new that I want to read, but then I also have a lot of backlist books that I want to read too. So thank you again for sticking with me throughout this whole long video. If there's any books on here that you read this year, have read before, that I've mentioned today, let me know and tell me which ones you read and which ones you liked. And if there's any recommendations you have for time travel books, please, let me know. So you all have a wonderful day. Thank you again for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.